Jimmy Fallon shocked when Robert De Niro suddenly walks off stage after seeing this letter that night on The Tonight Show. Robert De Niro stood up from his chair. Not at the end of a segment. Not after a handshake. Not after a final story. He stood up in the middle of a sentence, lifted a folded letter from the desk with both hands, and walked toward the edge of the stage. Jimmy Fallon stopped mid-laugh. The band stopped. 300 people in Studio 6B didn't make a sound. Nobody had seen Robert De Niro move like that in 30 years of television. The segment producer later said she'd worked in television for 21 years and never seen anything like it. It was a Thursday night in October. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon was in its third segment of taping. Robert De Niro was the featured guest, two-time Academy Award winner, one of the last living legends of New Hollywood, a man who had done thousands of interviews and always left you feeling like you'd only seen the surface. He walked out the way he always does, measured, deliberate, that slight forward lean like he's always about to say something important. The audience rose. Some of them had driven from New Jersey. One woman had flown from Chicago. They came because you don't get many more chances to see Robert De Niro on a talk show stage. He was 80 years old. Everything was right. Everything was flowing. The Tonight Show control room still talks about what happened next. Jimmy placed the envelope on the desk. Not loud, not staged, just a plain white envelope. Old, edges worn soft from being handled too many times. It had been sent to the show 3 weeks earlier by the family of a woman named Clara Mancuso. Inside was a letter. Jimmy hadn't read it on air yet. He slid it across the desk the way you'd pass something fragile. De Niro looked at it. He didn't reach for it immediately. His fingers touched the edge. Then his jaw went still. His head tilted, just slightly, the way a person tilts their head when their brain is pulling up something from a very deep place. His hand moved to his chest. Jimmy leaned forward. "Bobby, you all right?" De Niro didn't answer. He unfolded the letter slowly, the way you unfold something that has been folded for 50 years. The entire studio froze. Someone near the back thought it was a medical issue. Someone in the third row whispered that he'd forgotten where he was. He was 80. Was he okay? A single word came out, barely above a whisper, caught perfectly by his microphone. Clara. That was all. 300 people held their breath. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1973. Robert De Niro wasn't always Robert De Niro, icon and legend. In the spring of 1973, Robert De Niro was 29 years old and largely unknown outside of New York theater circles. Mean Streets hadn't opened yet. The Godfather Part 2 was still a year away. He was a young actor from the Lower East Side who worked between jobs at a diner on Mulberry Street. Not famous, not rich. Just someone burning with something that the rest of the world hadn't noticed yet. He remembers it was raining that Tuesday night when he walked into the Stonewall Community Theater on the far west side of Manhattan. A small room with maybe 200 seats and a stage that smelled like old wood and damp coats. He was there to watch a rehearsal for a production of A View from the Bridge. He wasn't in it. He just needed somewhere warm to sit and run his own lines. Clara Mancuso was 34 years old that spring. She was a drama teacher at PS 147 in the Bronx, a plain-spoken woman from Bensonhurst who had grown up watching old black-and-white films and decided before she was 12 that the theater was the most honest place a person could be. She was at the Stonewall that night because one of her students was in the rehearsal. She sat 2 seats from De Niro in the dark. She'd come alone because none of her friends understood why she still spent her evenings in these small theaters when there was television to watch. She noticed the young man beside her not because of who he was, but because of the way he watched the stage, like he was taking the whole thing apart and rebuilding it in real time. After the rehearsal ended, she said one thing to him. You weren't watching the actors. You were watching the space between them. He looked at her like she'd said something in a language he'd spent his whole life trying to learn. They talked until the theater locked up. He told her he hadn't had a callback in 4 months. She told him she'd seen 100 young actors give up right before the thing they were waiting for arrived. Before she left, she took a piece of paper from her program and wrote down a list. Not of industry contacts, not of casting directors, but of 7 scenes from 7 different plays. Learn all of these, she said. Not for an audition, for yourself, so that when it comes, you already know who you are. She pressed the paper into his hand. He folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. He used those scenes, every one of them. He spent the following weeks working through the list in the same order she had written it, not for any audition, not for any director, just for the thing she had described. He told a close friend years later that those 7 scenes were the closest thing to a map he had ever been given. The Godfather Part 2 came 14 months later, and he won the Academy Award. He thought about her the night they called his name. He thought about the Stonewall and the rain and the program paper. But he had no way to reach her. He didn't even know her last name. He knew only that she was a drama teacher in the Bronx, and that she had seen something in him before there was any evidence he was right to believe it himself. Clara Mancuso watched the ceremony from her apartment in the Bronx, with her husband Angelo and their daughter Maria, who was 6 years old and fell asleep before the awards were announced. She cheered quietly, so she wouldn't wake her. She didn't write to him. She didn't expect to hear from him. She had a full life. Her classroom, her students, her husband, 23 more years of teaching before she retired in 1996. She told the story to her students every year, not as a story about herself, but as a lesson about what a single honest conversation in a dark theater could do. She told them his name once. She never told them he owed her anything. She never believed he did. 3 months ago, Clara Mancuso was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe less, her doctors told her. Her daughter Maria, now 53, sat with her the following weekend and asked her if there was anything she wanted to do, anyone she wanted to reach out to. Clara was quiet for a long time. Then, she said she'd always wondered if the young man from the theater that night had kept those 7 scenes. Maria wrote a letter to The Tonight Show on her mother's behalf. She didn't ask for anything. She only said her mother was ill, and that she had a story she'd never told publicly, and that there was a small chance it might mean something to the person it involved. The Tonight Show received the letter. The segment producer read it twice, and then a 3rd time. She passed it to the booking team with a note that said, "This one is real." A response came from De Niro's office within 24 hours. The arrangement was made in complete secrecy. Tonight Show staff were told only that a specific guest would be in the audience. Clara was told she would be in the audience for a regular taping. She did not know he would be the guest. Maria had to help her walk to her seat that evening. Clara wore a blue dress she had bought with her first teaching paycheck in 1965. "I want her to feel like a person, not a moment," De Niro told the producer the day before taping. Behind the scenes, Robert De Niro had made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. He asked that the letter be placed on Jimmy's desk before the segment began, but not opened until a specific moment in the conversation. A moment he chose himself. He did not tell the producers what was in the letter. He did not tell them what he planned to do. The only person who knew was Maria, seated 2 rows behind her mother in the dark. Clara believed she was there to watch television being made. She did not know the man on stage had spent 50 years thinking about a rainy Tuesday night in a theater that no longer existed. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. De Niro stood. He lifted the letter from the desk. He walked to the edge of the stage, and then he stepped down off it entirely, which is not something guests do, and the cameras followed him, because the cameraman closest to the stage did not cut away, and the director didn't call for a commercial. And Jimmy said, "Folks, I think we need to let this happen," and 300 people sat completely still. He walked up the aisle slowly, still holding the letter. Maria stood up first. Clara turned in her seat, not understanding yet what was happening, and then she saw him, and her hand went to her mouth. He stopped at the end of her row. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He unfolded the paper he still carried, not the letter, but something else, something he had brought himself, a single piece of paper, old and soft at the folds, the words nearly worn away from the creases. He held it out toward her. It was a handwritten list of 7 scenes. She recognized her own handwriting immediately. "You kept it," her voice barely above a whisper, hands shaking against the armrests. "Every day." "That was 50 years ago. I was just a teacher. You were the only person that night who saw what I was trying to become. I didn't do anything. You told me to learn for myself, not for an audition. I never forgot that." Clara was crying now, quietly, the way people cry when something they stopped expecting finally arrives. Maria had both hands pressed to her face. "Why did you come here?" Clara asked. "Because Maria told me you were sick. And because I never said thank you. And because I have been thinking about that theater for 50 years, and I needed you to know that. I didn't need you to thank me. I know. That's why I came." Jimmy Fallon had climbed over the desk by then. He was standing at the edge of the stage with his hand over his mouth, not speaking, not performing. Just a person watching something happen that television doesn't usually get to hold. Questlove stood up from his drum kit. The director did not cut. The standing ovation started somewhere near the middle of the house and moved outward like a wave until the whole room was on its feet and the sound was enormous. De Niro sat down in the empty seat beside Clara and stayed there. He held the list of 7 scenes in both hands. Later, Maria would have it framed. Jimmy eventually made his way back to the stage, but he didn't speak for almost a full minute. When he did, his voice was unsteady. He just said, "Clara Mancuso, everybody. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten." 6 weeks later, on a Wednesday morning in December, Clara Mancuso passed away at home in the Bronx, with Angelo and Maria beside her. She was 85 years old. Robert De Niro did not attend the funeral service publicly, but Maria later confirmed that a man sat quietly in the 3rd row, not speaking to anyone, not there to be noticed, just there. The framed list of 7 scenes now hangs in the hallway outside what was once Clara's classroom at PS 147. The school kept her name on the door for the rest of that year. A new drama teacher arrived in January and found it hanging there and asked the principal who she was. The principal said she was a woman who understood the space between people before most people knew there was anything there to see.